if it's Instagram and you want them to post it on their grid, like don't use your brand colors, use theirs so that it actually looks great in the aesthetic that, you know, people are really protective about their brand aesthetic. So they're not going to, you know, post something that overtly promotes your podcast. But if you make it really easy for them by following their aesthetic, having a designer put something together that really suits what they usually post, it just makes it easy.
This Audience Summit is brought to you in partnership with Podcast Notes, the best ideas from the world's best podcasts in minutes.
Lauren, welcome to the Grow Your Podcast Audience Summit, brought to you by The Lewis and Kyle Show. We're super excited to have you as a contributor today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, for the listeners or people on YouTube, could you quickly introduce yourself personally and tell us a little bit about yourself and your podcast, the when and why you started it, and what your overall mission is?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Lauren Arms. I am an Australian living in London, UK, and I run a business called Well To Do. And we essentially publish content and insights into the global wellness industry. So trends, like a lot of entrepreneurial insight to help someone who wants to start a business in the wellness industry to kind of understand what's driving consumer trends, what's driving growth, like where investors are interested in investing. And so off the back of 5 years of building that as a digital content platform, we launched a podcast called the Business of Wellness podcast. And it is what it says on the tin. It is all about the business of wellness. So if you want to start the next, you know, like Lululemon clothing athleisure brand, or you want to open a yoga studio, or you want to start a nutrition or supplement brand, then the podcast is all geared towards like really experienced entrepreneurs in that space, sharing the challenges and the real kind of highs and lows of building a business in that space. And I actually have a second podcast. So I have two podcasts that I host, and the second one is called Experts. And it's also geared towards the wellness industry, but it's more focused on individuals that have turned their expert knowledge about well-being. So like a meditation expert or a nutrition expert or a dietitian or a doctor, and they're taking that expert knowledge and turning that into like a digital service-based business with courses and memberships and programs and that sort of thing. So that's, again, a series of interviews and also kind of solo episodes where we really talk about how to grow a successful business.
Those are some great podcasts. Well, I'm personally involved with a sports drink startup, so I'll have to get the team tuning in to the wellness podcast for sure.
Totally.
Yeah. First question for you. What has been the most effective marketing channel for growing your podcast audience, and how have you used it?
Yeah, great question. So I guess I sort of answered this a little bit in the background of the business, in that we spent 5 years building up, you know, a really strong database of content and readership just through written insights pieces on our website. So our main website is Well To Do Global, and we publish 4 articles a day, and we have done that every day for the last 5 years. So we have, you know, over 200,000 readers every month who were already engaging with that content. And so as far as like an effective marketing channel, we already had an audience that just wanted to engage in our content through a different medium, and a podcast just made perfect sense for us. It was like a really easy decision to make, to say, okay, we're producing all this written content, podcasts just give another way of our audience accessing that content. So we do a lot of cross promotion through our own audience, and that's probably been the most effective marketing channel for us, for sure.
Wow, that's incredible. 4 articles a day.
Yeah.
That kind of pace has got to be hard to keep up with. But the second question for you and for everybody involved in the summit is, what are some underrated tactics that you've used to attract listeners to your show?
I think that the really key thing, and it seems like the most obvious thing, but is getting the right guests on your show. I think fundamentally having a really clear niche, because as you guys well know, and for everybody listening to this, like podcasts are growing at rapid pace. I mean, I don't know, maybe you guys know the statistics, but like there must be tens of thousands of podcasts launching every day all around the world. And so to stand out, we realized that we had to have a really clear niche for content, and be to attract the right high caliber interviewees that would almost do the promotion part for us. So by virtue of, incredible person A being on your podcast, like the founder of the leading companies that people recognize as leaders in that industry category, it's built enormous credibility for our podcast. And I guess that makes it, well, what we've also done too, I guess, in addition to that, is make it really easy for those guests to talk about their involvement in our podcast. So like, for example, creating assets for them to share seems like a really obvious one, but like doing it in their brand colors, or creating the copy that makes it really easy for them to like copy paste and post that on their LinkedIn or share it on their Instagram, not relying on them to do the work to cross promote their involvement, making it really easy by pooling together like a bunch of assets so that they can make that promotional, make that announcement about their involvement really easily. And then again, like something we decided to do quite recently was to actually record it in video format. Because podcasting is a great medium, but if you're creating that content once, why not proliferate it across multiple channels? So also releasing it as a podcast, as a YouTube video, or also releasing it as a snippet on our IGTV channel, always kind of driving back to the podcast, but just kind of using those multiple angles to proliferate that same content across as many different channels as possible.
Yeah, I think those tips are especially relevant. I mean, I just in the past 2 weeks observed the truth of both of those for our own show, because for the first 5 months or so, we only published on audio, and then we started publishing the video, and then within 2 months, our videos have 5 or twice as many views as the original audio has. So we were just completely leaving that unexploited. And then early on, I was really frustrated because guests weren't. We kind of had that same idea. Let's get relevant people in the space, and then they wouldn't share it. And we were kind of like upset. And then we're like, well, what now? Looking back and kind of hearing you talk, we didn't make it easier for them. We just said share it. And like, what does that mean? Share it on. You got to say, put it on this channel. Here's a picture for you to use that makes sense in the context of what you already post. Here's a caption that makes sense in the context of what you post. Here's a couple of here's a long one if you want a long one, a short one if you want a short one, and with making it easier for them. And then I tried that with the most recent guest, and his company shared it because we did all the work for them. So it's so true. Totally. I wish I'd learned those lessons early on.
Mm-hmm. And I think you make a really good point there, Lewis. Like looking at what they're, if it's Instagram and you want them to post it on their grid, like don't use your brand colors, use theirs so that it actually looks great in the aesthetic that, people are really protective about their brand aesthetic. So they're not going to, post something that overtly promotes your podcast. But if you make it really easy for them by following their aesthetic, having a designer put something together that really suits what they usually post, it just makes it easy.
No, that's huge. That's a great tip. Third question for you. How have you converted the listeners of your show into fans? And how have you kept the same people coming back?
Yeah. So again, I think consistency. So for example, like asking the same types of questions so that the storyline follows in a way that your listeners learn the type of information they're going to get if they listen. So we follow not exactly the same series of questions, but the same like narrative arc of, where did you start out? What were the biggest challenges in the early days? Like, how did you prove product market fit? And then how did you scale up? And following that same narrative across every episode gives your listeners, a clear expectation of what it's going to be like to listen to each episode. We have kind of started to try and create a bit more scarcity by running seasons of the podcast. I think it's actually sometimes, although it sounds counterintuitive to have a break, it's a good thing to have a break, right? Because then people miss the show and they look forward to season 4 or season 5. We run a trailer for that season. We create a bit of excitement about who's coming on to the season. Again, like using Instagram, we create a bit of like, can you guess who the guests are for season 4 or 5? And just create a little bit of like tension in our audience as well. I guess, like converting listeners, into fans is really important, but we also think about how to convert them into clients, because for us, we use a podcast as a marketing tool to generate sales in our business. So if that's why you are launching a podcast to ultimately support revenue generation in your business, I think it's really key to also think about the journey that you want your audience to go on, having listened to the podcast. So as an example, at the end of every podcast, and also I think in the right in the middle of the podcast, we have our own advert that runs, which promotes some kind of lead magnet, some kind of opt-in, some kind of value add through our website. So we invite them to go and like download this free guide or take this free quiz, so that we're making sure that we kind of capture that data as well. And they're not just listeners, they're not just podcast fans, they actually translate into paying customers, and we can nurture them through our email campaigns and through our other marketing strategies as well. And I think that's really important to think about if you are launching a podcast as a marketing tool that you ultimately want to drive sales and growth in your business, rather than just for the glory of having a successful podcast.
No, I think there's, again, a number of points there worth repeating. How if you already have people listening to your show, that means they enjoy the types of things you have to teach. So making offers to them that they've already self-selected for being relevant people who'd want to hear them, whether it's a free ebook or some, again, additional service from you, chances are they're going to actually appreciate that, because if they're listening to the podcast, they've already told you that they want to hear more from you. So that's really smart. And then I really like the kind of, when you can take a break, you can create some excitement for what's coming up. One thing, one of the other summit participants, his name is Jake Allen. He hosts a podcast featuring different business leaders from Las Vegas. And he posts this thing on Twitter that's just 4 graphics, like 4 different pictures without any context from different parts of the city. He's like, who do you think this is? Pictures with no context. And since it's a big local following, everyone tries to guess based on, which casinos are pictured and which restaurants, like who this could be. And I think that's a really fun way to make me excited to want to come back on Twitter and see what he has next. And if you do that in your space, that's really effective as well. But Kyle, you want to ask the 4th question?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was a really thoughtful answer, and I hope that the people listening take that into their brains and chew on it for a minute. But the 4th question for you is, if you could start your show over again with what you have learned and what you know now, what would you do differently to grow it more effectively?
This is a really probably unexpected answer, but one thing that most people underestimate is how much planning and work is required to kind of launch a great podcast. And we very quickly realized that we were like constantly on the back foot trying to get the show recorded for the next week. So if I were to do it again, I would schedule a whole bunch of interviews in advance, so that we had a bit more of a like archive to buffer us when guests cancel, when people want to reschedule, because inevitably it happens, right? Like you have an awesome guest, and I think the higher quality or higher caliber of your guests, almost the more likely they are to cancel or reschedule, because they're probably really busy, successful people. So we didn't really anticipate that, and it meant that it got to a point where it was a bit of a constant scramble to make sure we had really good content going out on a weekly basis. In that sense, like being realistic, if you're committing from the outset to a weekly episode, just making sure that you've actually got the bandwidth to do that, making sure you're really well prepared, making sure that you've done your research on the interviewee, because ultimately a great interview is based on really knowing the backstory of the interviewee, right? Like that's what is going to set that interview apart to the 5, 10, maybe 20 other interviews that person has done, that asking really thoughtful questions, that you have really like taken the time to consider the story that you want to tell, and the journey that you want to take your listener on, and how you want them to feel when they have finished listening to that. Yeah, so I think that would be the thing that I would consider as like just being organized and not being on the back foot as far as like scheduling is concerned.
Yeah, I think that's also really important for avoiding burnout as the creator, because if you constantly feel behind, that just becomes exhausting and stressful. So the more you can feel ahead, you feel like relaxed and smooth and at ease, and that makes you more excited to do the work instead of dreading or in a panic mode.
100%.
But yeah, the last question we have for you, and I'm not sure if you do any paid promotion for your podcast or if it's mostly organic, But if courtesy of the Lewis and Kyle Show Audience Summit, we gave you a free $1,000 to promote your show and come up with some clever way to attract new listeners, what would you do with the money?
So we talked a little bit about YouTube before, I think, and the proof is kind of in the pudding as far as you've just talked there, Lewis, from your experience. But YouTube is such a strong search engine for anybody looking for information. So I think what we would have done sooner is outsourced video editing so that we could produce some like really beautiful, high quality video productions of our podcasts to just grow the audience there as well. You're doing it once anyway. We didn't have the video editing skills within our team, and it became like, oh, that's too hard, let's not do it. So if I had that budget, or if I, had my time again, I would invest in repurposing the podcast content or recordings in a really meaningful way on YouTube that, was like a high quality production as well, like some cool graphics, bit of animation, like key takeaways at the end, and kind of making the most of that as an additional channel to distribute on.
Yeah, I love that. And a lot of the answers that we've gotten from people in the summit have been using the money to buy time for themselves. And I think that is a common desire of people that are in the space, is just wanting, more time to do the research that you're talking about and produce actually the really high quality interviews and making that what they're focused on.
Yeah, for sure. And actually we made the right decision to outsource production from the word go. And I know a lot of people think, oh, it's easier and cheaper to do it myself. And I honestly don't think it is. Like, I honestly think if you were to spend that time attracting a sponsor or getting higher quality or caliber interviewees, or, making sure that the research is really strong, and then paying someone who's really good at the editing to do that part for you, it just increases the quality of your podcast. Having someone edit out all the ums and ahs and weird things that really annoy you as a listener is so valuable. And unless you want to figure out how to do that yourself and spend hours doing it, there are some really affordable ways of outsourcing it that I have no regrets about paying for from the day, from the first day we started.
Yeah, it's who, not how, right?
Totally.
Well, Lauren, thank you very much for coming on and talking to us and sharing what you've learned growing your podcast. If our listeners want to find out more about you, where should we send them to?
Yeah, for sure. No worries. So probably the easiest way is to find me on Instagram. So it's @LaurenArms. From there are links in my bio to both the Business of Wellness podcast and the Experts podcast.
Well, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much for watching this interview. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to our channel right here on YouTube. And if you feel like you learned something, share this episode on social media to help us grow our audience as well.